High school shootings are a tragedy that communities pray they never have to face. When they do occur, they are often solitary acts of deeply hidden rage. But what happens when an impending massacre is treated like a spectator sport? What happens when a teenager explicitly tells his classmates he is going to execute his tormentor, and instead of warning the authorities, his friends bring cameras to watch the slaughter unfold? On the morning of February 19th, 1997, the isolated community of Bethel, Alaska, was shattered by a 16-year-old boy who turned his high school lobby into a public execution site. The architect of this public nightmare was Evan Ramsey. From the moment he was born, Evan's life was steeped in chaos and followed a bizarre, violent family script. When Evan was just 5 years old, his father, Don Ramsey, stormed an Anchorage newspaper office. Angry that the paper refused to publish his political letter, he chained the doors shut, set off smoke grenades, and engaged in a terrifying standoff before being sent to prison. Left behind, Evan's mother spiraled into severe alcoholism. The state stripped her of custody, throwing Evan and his brothers into a turbulent foster care nightmare. He was bounced through 10 different foster homes in just 2 years, enduring unimaginable physical and sexual abuse along the way. The trauma was so severe that at the age of 10, Evan walked to a cliff, waded into the freezing ocean, and attempted to drown himself. By the time he reached Bethel Regional High School, 16-year-old Evan was a profoundly broken, deeply depressed teenager. Instead of a safe harbor, he found a ruthless environment. He was entirely alienated, relentlessly mocked, and heavily bullied by his peers, who degraded him constantly and called him Screech. A 15-year-old popular basketball player named Josh Palacios became his primary tormentor, having beaten Evan in a physical fight 4 years prior. The humiliation festered into deep-seated vengeance. Evan also developed a fierce hatred for the school principal, 50-year-old Ron Edwards, blaming the administration for ignoring the daily torment. In the dark of his bedroom, Evan drafted a specific hit list letter, explicitly naming Principal Edwards as an intended target. The breaking point arrived, but Evan did not snap. In a sudden, silent rage, he broadcasted his deadly intentions. In the weeks leading up to the massacre, Evan explicitly told over 15 different students about his plan to bring a gun to school and murder the people who wronged him. 2 friends actively crossed the line from bystanders to accomplices. A student named James Randall took Evan aside and physically taught him exactly how to load, pump, and fire a Mossberg 512-gauge shotgun. Another peer, Matthew Charles, fueled Evan's dark ego, enthusiastically hyping the massive infamy he would achieve by pulling off the shooting. After school, the 3 boys spent hours playing the violently graphic video game Doom, further desensitizing themselves to the impending slaughter. Evan's father would later publicly blame the game for the real-life violence. On the morning of the attack, several students literally arrived at school carrying cameras. They positioned themselves on the library balcony, overlooking the student commons area, eagerly waiting for the show to begin. On February 19th, 1997, Evan Ramsey made good on his horrific promise. He stole the Mossberg 500 shotgun from his foster home, concealed it under his heavy winter jacket, and took the bus to Bethel Regional High School. He walked straight into the crowded student commons area, fully aware that his audience was watching from the balcony above. At exactly 8:40 a.m., Evan pulled the shotgun from his jacket. He spotted his primary target, 15-year-old Josh Palacios, sitting at a table with friends. As Josh began to stand up, Evan leveled a 12-gauge and fired directly into the boy's abdomen. At close range, Josh collapsed to the floor, mortally wounded. The pellets from the blast also struck and injured 2 other students sitting nearby. Panic erupted, but Evan was far from finished. He pumped the shotgun, pacing the hallway. An art teacher, Rain Athanes, ran out of the teacher's lounge and bravely attempted to talk the teenager down. She pleaded with him to drop the weapon. Evan aimed the shotgun directly at her chest, paused for a terrifying second, and then lowered the barrel. He had another specific target on his list. He marched straight for the main administration office. Principal Ron Edwards heard the commotion and stepped out into the hallway to find the active shooter. When he saw Evan, armed with the shotgun, the 50-year-old principal immediately turned to run back into the office to secure the area. Evan raised the weapon and fired. He shot Principal Edwards twice, striking him squarely in the back and the shoulder. The principal collapsed and died on his office floor. Minutes later, Bethel police officers flooded the building. They spotted Evan standing in the commons area. The teenager raised his weapon and fired a single round in the direction of the police. An officer immediately returned fire. Realizing he was outgunned, the reality of the situation crashed down on the 16-year-old. Evan threw the shotgun onto the floor, put his hands in the air, and screamed, "I don't want to die." Officers rushed forward and aggressively took him into custody. The trial of Evan Ramsey was a massive legal battle. Because of the sheer brutality of the crime, the prosecution successfully had the 16-year-old tried as an adult. They ruthlessly highlighted the undeniable premeditation, pointing to the stolen weapon, the hit list letter found in his bedroom, and the horrific fact that he coordinated the event with an audience. The defense attempted to minimize his culpability, arguing that Evan intended to commit suicide by cop rather than murder. They tried to argue that Evan's history of extreme sexual abuse and foster care made him inherently suicidal rather than homicidal. The jury found Evan Ramsey guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, and 15 counts of assault. During his sentencing, Evan showed very little emotion until it was his time to speak, simply stating, "I'm so sorry." Judge Wood deliberately imposed consecutive 99-year maximums for the murders, delivering a crushing sentence of 210 years, which was later commuted to a composite term of 198 years to serve. The friends who helped plan the massacre faced a drastically different reality. Despite their crucial roles in teaching Evan how to use the murder weapon and hyping up the event, James Randall and Matthew Charles were tried strictly as juveniles. They faced minimal consequences and were legally mandated to be freed the moment they turned 19 years old. Years later, in a prison interview, Evan explicitly confessed his initial motive, stating his main objective for going into the high school was to commit suicide. But behind bars, his violent tendencies only continued. He was thrown into solitary confinement for 6 months after brutally beating a fellow inmate with a sock filled with batteries. The motive for the brutal assault was a gambling debt over exactly 4 candy bars. Today, Evan Ramsey remains incarcerated at the Wildwood Correctional Complex in Alaska. His appeals have been entirely denied, and his 188-year sentence stands firm. He will not be legally eligible for parole until the year 2066, when he is 85 years old. The Bethel Regional High School shooting remains a terrifying chapter in Alaskan history, a chilling reminder of the catastrophic damage caused by severe childhood trauma, deep-seated vengeance, and the horrific reality of peers who chose to watch a massacre instead of stopping it. High school is supposed to be a foundation for the future, but for 15-year-old Eric Hainstock, the hallways of Western High School in Cazenovia, Wisconsin, were a gauntlet of psychological torment. He was the classic outcast, a quiet teenager who became the primary target for a relentless group of bullies. He was shoved into lockers, labeled with homophobic slurs, and subjected to a constant stream of degradation. His nightmare did not end when the final bell rang. His home life was a separate house of horrors, marked by severe abuse, leaving him completely devoid of a safe haven. The constant abuse shattered his mental state, leaving him deeply depressed and harboring a profoundly negative self-image. But Eric's descent into violence was not just the result of passive suffering. His behavior at school escalated into open defiance and aggression. The adults he expected to protect him became the targets of his rage. The breaking point was not a sudden snap, but a calculated buildup of retaliation. Just weeks before the shooting, Principal John Klang suspended Eric for 3 days after the teenager threw a stapler at a special education teacher. The tension reached its absolute peak the day before the tragedy, when Principal Klang issued another suspension after catching Eric with chewing tobacco in his backpack. Eric decided he was done taking orders. He made his deadly intentions perfectly clear. At a church youth group meeting a week and a half before the shooting, he explicitly warned his peers that Principal Klang would not survive homecoming. On the morning of September 29, 2006, Eric turned that threat into a reality. He broke into his father's locked gun cabinet and armed himself with a 20-gauge shotgun and a 22 caliber revolver. He concealed the weapons inside his jacket and walked into Western High School around 8 a.m. He did not walk quietly to the administration office. Immediately upon entering, Eric pulled the shotgun and aimed it directly at a social studies teacher. Panic erupted through the corridors as staff screamed for students to run and hide. Before Eric could pull the trigger, the school custodian, Dave Thompson, made a heroic intervention. He lunged at the teenager, violently wresting the shotgun out of his hands. But Eric had planned for resistance. Stripped of his primary weapon, he reached inside his jacket and drew the loaded 22 caliber revolver. Hearing the chaos, Principal John Klang stepped out into the hallway to confront the threat head-on. He put himself directly in the line of fire to protect the hundreds of students barricaded in the classrooms behind him. Seeing the teenager armed with the handgun, Klang charged forward to neutralize the threat, attempting to wrap Eric in a bear hug. Eric leveled the revolver and fired 3 shots at point-blank range, striking the principal in the chest and abdomen. Despite suffering catastrophic, fatal internal injuries, John Klang refused to stop fighting. Bleeding heavily, the dying principal tackled the 15-year-old to the hard hallway floor. He pinned Eric down, completely disarming him and holding him firmly in place until law enforcement arrived. John Klang sacrificed his own life to ensure the teenager could not harm a single student. He died hours later at a local hospital. The arrest of Eric Hainstock revealed a chilling lack of immediate remorse. During his police interrogation, Eric plainly stated he was ticked off at the principal, the teachers, and the students. He explicitly confessed to firing the 3 shots on purpose after Klang tried to restrain him. The trial showcased a deeply disturbed yet highly calculated teenager. The defense portrayed Eric as a broken boy, a victim of systemic failure, extreme bullying, and horrific domestic abuse, diagnosing him with severe depression and borderline personality features. The prosecution dismantled any attempt to minimize his culpability, focusing on the undeniable premeditation. They highlighted his theft of the firearms, his explicit threats at the church group, and his immediate desire for retaliation over his recent suspensions. When Eric took the stand, he attempted to change his story, claiming he only fired 1 shot intentionally. The prosecutor aggressively shut down the lie. Perhaps the most disturbing display of his emotional detachment occurred on the very morning of his sentencing. Facing the reality of spending his life in a cage, his attorney walked into the holding room and found the teenager casually watching the children's cartoon, SpongeBob SquarePants. In August 2007, the jury found Eric Hainstock guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. The judge acknowledged the horrific realities of Eric's upbringing and the severe bullying he endured, but ruled that the calculated execution of an educator demanded severe punishment. He sentenced Eric to life in prison, but with a critical caveat. He granted the possibility of parole after 30 years and explicitly urged the Department of Corrections to place the teenager in a juvenile center rather than an adult facility. From behind bars, he wrote a 10-page letter with the help of a cellmate, taking some responsibility for the murder, while still insisting he was not to blame for everything. Today, Eric Hainstock is serving his sentence at the Oshkosh Correctional Institution. He claims to have gained 50 pounds, improved his reading comprehension, and is working toward his GED. He will be eligible for parole in 2037 when he is 46 years old. His story remains a terrifying examination of how untreated trauma, relentless bullying, and a desire for retaliation can turn a high school hallway into a scene of unspeakable tragedy. College campuses are designed to be sanctuaries of intellectual freedom and self-discovery. But what happens when an institution prioritizes protocol over the glaring, undeniable warning signs of a massacre? On a freezing December day in 1992, a heavy package from a North Carolina company called Classic Arms arrived at the mailroom of Bard College at Simon's Rock. School receptionist Teresa Beavers physically opened the box and discovered it was packed with hundreds of rounds of 7.62 caliber ammunition. The package was addressed to an 18-year-old freshman. Crippled by administrative indecision, the school made a catastrophic choice. They handed the bullets directly over to the teenager. Hours later, the quiet liberal arts college transformed into a hunting ground, and Teresa Beavers became the first target of a deeply alienated student who turned his isolation into a night of terror. The student was Wayne Lowe, born in Taiwan and raised in Montana. Lowe was a highly intelligent violinist attending the Massachusetts Early College program on a prestigious music scholarship. Simon's Rock was known for its fiercely liberal, progressive student body. Wayne Lowe deliberately positioned himself as the exact opposite. He cultivated an ultra-conservative, highly offensive persona, openly expressing racist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic views. He was an active provocateur seeking a reaction, heavily influenced by the secular punk band Sick of It All. The pushback from the student body was immediate. Lowe was wholly rejected, ostracized, and subjected to intense psychological bullying. Instead of transferring, Lowe leaned into the alienation. He developed a dangerous superiority complex, viewing the liberal students and faculty as hypocritical degenerates. He convinced himself he was a divine instrument, chosen to cleanse the campus of its perceived sins. The execution of his plan unfolded with chilling precision, marked by massive institutional failures. Purchasing the ammunition over the phone was incredibly easy. He simply used his mother's credit card. On December 14, 1992, after the school inexplicably handed him the bullets, Lowe took a taxi to Dave's Sporting Goods and legally purchased a Chinese-made SKS semi-automatic rifle for $129. He returned to his dorm, unbothered. He began preparing for violence, shaving his head earlier in the evening. By 9:20 p.m., an acquaintance passed him in the dormitory hallway and noted his newly bald head. During dinner, Lowe's behavior deeply alarmed a fellow student. This student placed an explicit, anonymous phone call to school officials, warning them that Lowe was heavily armed and specifically intended to kill members of the Robinson family who lived on campus. Despite the intercepted ammunition and the direct phone threat, the administration failed to initiate a campus-wide lockdown. Alone in his room, Lowe listened to an inner voice. At 10 p.m., he loaded his SKS rifle, filled his pockets with the ammunition the school had given him, and stepped out into the freezing night. His first target was the campus security booth. He approached the shack, raised his rifle, and shot security guard Teresa Beavers, the very woman who found his bullets hours earlier, twice in the abdomen. She collapsed to the floor, bleeding profusely, but miraculously survived. Lowe kept walking. He turned his attention to a car driving down a dark campus road. Inside was 37-year-old Spanish professor Nyakunyan Sayas. Lowe fired his rifle directly through the vehicle, fatally striking the professor in the head. The car veered off the road and crashed into the snow. Lowe continued his march toward the campus library. Inside the library, 18-year-old Galen Gibson heard the loud pops. Gibson was a beloved poetry major, popular and widely respected, the exact kind of student Lowe despised. Believing the sounds were a car accident outside, Gibson stepped out through the front doors to help. Lowe spotted Gibson in the dark and shot him twice in the chest. Gibson managed to crawl back inside the library doors before collapsing and dying on the floor. Lowe then opened fire on the library itself, shattering the windows and sending terrified teenagers scrambling for cover. He shot and severely wounded 3 more students, Thomas McElderry, Joshua A. Faber, and Matthew David. He terrorized the school for 20 agonizing minutes, punishing the community that had shunned him. The massacre ended in a quiet, calculated surrender. Wayne Lowe walked into the student union building, placed his SKS rifle on a table, used a campus phone to call 911, and calmly waited to be arrested. Following his arrest, Lowe exhibited a disturbing detachment from reality. He appeared confused in jail, telling officials he thought he was on a vacation and would be flying home to Montana soon. He showed zero initial remorse, telling his father over the phone that he had done God's will because there were too many sins on campus. He brazenly wore his "Sick of It All" t-shirt during his arraignment. The trial was intentionally moved from Berkshire County to Hampton Superior Court in Springfield by the judge, primarily due to concerns over the massive local media frenzy. The defense relied entirely on an insanity plea. They brought in psychiatrists who testified that Lowe was suffering from severe paranoid schizophrenia, painting a picture of a severely mentally ill boy driven by religious delusions. The prosecution ruthlessly dismantled this defense by exposing the indisputable timeline of his premeditation. The court-appointed psychiatrist rejected the paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis entirely, attributing his actions solely to narcissistic personality disorder. The jury saw the truth in the cold facts. They found Wayne Lowe guilty on all 17 charges against him. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 20 years. Decades into his sentence, Lowe's story took unexpected turns. 25 years after the massacre, he participated in a face-to-face StoryCorps audio interview from inside prison with Greg Gibson, the father of the student he murdered. In 2024, a landmark Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruling banned life without parole sentences for offenders under 21. Because Lowe was 18 at the time of the shooting, he became legally eligible for a resentencing hearing and a potential chance at freedom. But Wayne Lowe made a surprising legal choice. He formally waived his right to a resentencing hearing. In a submitted affidavit, Lowe listed the names of all the people he fatally and non-fatally shot. He officially stated that he believed his permanent sentence was fair and proportional to the horrific crimes he committed. Today, he remains behind bars, his fate permanently sealed by his own admission of guilt. High school hallways in the early morning are packed, chaotic spaces. Teenagers rush to their lockers, shoulder to shoulder, entirely vulnerable. When a student decides to turn this environment into a slaughterhouse, they typically choose firearms to inflict mass casualties from a distance. But on the morning of April 9th, 2014, a 16-year-old boy in Murraysville, Pennsylvania, chose a far more intimate and visceral method of revenge. He armed himself with 2 massive kitchen knives and unleashed a systematic hunt through the crowded corridors of Franklin Regional High School. The architect of this horror was Alex Hibble. To the outside world, Alex was an unassuming sophomore, living in an affluent suburb. He had a seemingly normal family life and stayed completely off the disciplinary radar. But beneath this unremarkable exterior, A deep, festering alienation was rapidly consuming his mind. Alex felt socially isolated, disconnected from his peers, and harbored a profound resentment toward the student body. Instead of finding a healthy outlet, Alex retreated into the darkest corners of the internet. He intensely studied past school massacres, developing a deep, twisted obsession with the Columbine high school shooters, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. He idolized them, viewing their horrific actions as the ultimate form of retaliation. Alex decided it was his turn to inflict that same level of pain on his own classmates. His premeditation was highly calculated and deeply symbolic. He originally planned to execute his attack on April 20th to exactly coincide with the 15th anniversary of the Columbine massacre. When he realized the school was scheduled to be closed for a holiday that day, he deliberately pivoted his plan to April 9th, the exact birthday of Columbine shooter Eric Harris. Alex methodically documented his hatred. He wrote a chilling manifesto titled Ragnarok, referencing the Norse apocalypse legend. In this document, he explicitly stated his desire to destroy his peers, writing, "I can't wait to see the priceless and helpless looks on the faces of the students of one of the best schools in Pennsylvania realize their precious lives are going to be taken." He kept this manifesto hidden in his school locker alongside his cell phone. The day before the massacre, Alex escalated his intent by making threatening phone calls to at least 2 students, firmly setting his violent plan into motion. The morning of April 9th started like any other. Alex woke up, walked into his family's kitchen, and selected 2 straight knives measuring between 8 and 10 inches long. Alex slipped the long blades into his pockets, grabbed his backpack, and headed to school. He arrived early, blending perfectly into the morning rush. At exactly 7:13 a.m., just minutes before the start of first period, Alex walked into the crowded main hallway. He did not shout a warning. He pulled the 2 massive kitchen knives from his pockets and began his rampage. Alex dual-wielded the blades, moving quickly and fluidly through the densely packed corridor. He slashed horizontally and stabbed forward, targeting the torsos, arms, and faces of anyone in his path. Because the hallway was so crowded, many students initially bumped into him and felt a sharp punch, completely unaware they had just been stabbed. As panic erupted, Alex made a highly tactical and terrifying move. He deliberately reached out and pulled the school fire alarm. It was a calculated attempt to draw even more students out of the safety of their classrooms and into the crowded hallway, maximizing his target pool. Despite the overwhelming panic, incredible acts of heroism unfolded. Security guard John Resetter attempted to intervene and was immediately stabbed. Student Jared Boga suffered a catastrophic stab wound to his chest that pierced his liver and narrowly missed his heart. He collapsed, but was kept alive by quick-thinking peers who compressed his wound until paramedics arrived. The violent rampage lasted for 5 agonizing minutes. Alex slashed and stabbed a total of 20 students and 1 security guard, leaving a devastating trail of 21 victims in his wake. The massacre finally came to a forceful end, thanks to the immediate bravery of the school staff and students. Hearing the screams, Assistant Principal Sam King rushed into the hallway and spotted the armed teenager. King charged forward, tackling the 16-year-old to the ground with the direct physical help of a student named Ian Griffith. Together, they pinned Alex to the hard floor. Even while restrained, Alex adamantly refused to drop his weapons. He looked up and delivered a chilling confession, stating plainly, "My work is not done. I have more people to kill." The aftermath was a logistical nightmare and a medical miracle. Dozens of critically injured teenagers were rushed to regional trauma centers. Despite the extreme severity of the wounds, every single victim survived. The legal battle centered heavily on Alex's mental state and his age. His defense attorneys fought fiercely to have the case moved to juvenile court. The judge firmly denied the request, noting that placing the case in the juvenile system would legally require Alex to be released back into society on his 21st birthday, completely ignoring the severity of his crimes. Alex was ordered to stand trial as an adult. The defense then attempted to enter a formal plea of guilty but mentally ill, bringing in 3 psychiatrists who testified that Alex suffered from major depressive disorder and schizotypal personality disorder. The judge forcefully rejected this plea arrangement. Facing an overwhelming mountain of evidence, Alex pleaded guilty to 21 counts of attempted murder and 21 counts of aggravated assault. During his 2018 sentencing hearing, Alex attempted to cast himself as a victim, briefly addressing the court to claim his actions were fueled by bullying. Realizing his excuses were failing, Alex shifted his tone, stating, "My biggest mistake was falsely believing that if I took revenge, I would be happy." The judge delivered a harsh, unforgiving sentence. He condemned Alex Hubble to 23.5 to 60 years in a state penitentiary, ordered him to pay $269,000 in restitution, and mandated ongoing mental health treatment. Today, Alex Hubble is incarcerated at the State Correctional Institution in Albion, Pennsylvania. The Franklin Regional High School stabbing stands as a dark reminder that devastating school violence does not always require a firearm, and that a quiet teenager can harbor a terrifying capacity for cold-blooded destruction. High school hallways can be brutal ecosystems where social hierarchies are strictly enforced through cruelty and targeted humiliation. For a teenager struggling with their appearance, a minor comment can feel like a massive blow. But when those comments escalate into a relentless, physical campaign of bullying, the psychological damage is devastating. In the quiet town of Cold Spring, Minnesota, a 15-year-old boy allowed his profound humiliation to curdle into a cold, homicidal rage. The architect of this revenge was John Jason McLaughlin. In the fall of 2003, John was a freshman at Rockery High School. He was a quiet, introverted teenager dealing with a severe, highly visible case of acne. In the harsh environment of a high school locker room, his skin condition made him a prime target. A 14-year-old freshman named Seth Bartell noticed this vulnerability and exploited it ruthlessly. Seth subjected John to continuous verbal and physical torment. He pushed John around in the hallways and repeatedly mocked his appearance in front of other students, cruelly labeling him with the demeaning nickname Pizza Face. The constant humiliation rapidly wore John down. Instead of seeking help, he internalized the abuse. His shame mutated into a calculated desire for absolute payback. In the quiet of his bedroom, John meticulously documented his hatred. His personal journals and notes detailed a premeditated plan for revenge, formulated several days in advance of the actual attack. John made a deliberate decision to end the torment with extreme violence. On the morning of September 24th, 2003, he bypassed his textbooks. He walked into his parents' bedroom, opened his father's dresser, and stole a loaded .22 caliber Colt Target model pistol. In a dark, tragic irony, John had recently passed a Department of Natural Resources firearms safety course where he was specifically trained using a .22 caliber handgun. He knew exactly how the weapon operated. He placed the lethal firearm inside his gym bag, zipped it shut, and headed to school. His intent was clear, and it extended beyond just one bully. Earlier that morning, in a driver's education class, John explicitly asked two other students if another boy was in school that day, heavily implying he had multiple targets on a mental hit list. Just before noon, John initiated a highly calculated dry run. He carried his gym bag into a school bathroom and entered a stall. He explicitly cocked the weapon inside the enclosed space to muffle the sound, ensuring no one would hear the slide rack. He then walked out and sat quietly on a bench, gripping the gun inside the bag, waiting for his primary target to appear. When Seth Bartell walked into the hallway outside the locker room, John stepped out into the open. He raised the .22 caliber pistol and pulled the trigger. The first shot was a direct hit, striking Seth squarely in the chest. John fired a second shot at the fleeing boy. This bullet missed Seth, ricocheted hard off a hallway wall, and struck 17-year-old Aaron Rawlings directly in the neck. Aaron was a beloved high school senior who had absolutely nothing to do with the bullying. He was completely innocent, simply walking through the area at the exact wrong time. The ricocheting bullet severed his carotid artery. Aaron collapsed to the hard floor and died almost instantly. Ignoring the dead senior bleeding out behind him, John maintained his deadly focus on his primary target. He actively hunted Seth, pursuing the bleeding 14-year-old up the stairs and into the gymnasium. He cornered Seth, leveled the handgun, and fired again, striking the boy directly in the head. The massacre was abruptly interrupted by physical education teacher Mark Johnson. Hearing the echoing gunshots, Johnson ran directly toward the danger. He entered the gym and found John standing over the wounded boy. The teenager immediately raised the .22 caliber pistol and aimed it directly at the teacher's chest. Johnson stopped in his tracks, threw his hands in the air, and shouted a firm, authoritative "No." Faced with the unwavering command of the adult, the teenager's homicidal trance finally broke. John lowered the gun. He manually ejected the remaining live shells onto the gym floor, dropped the weapon, and surrendered. Johnson secured the firearm and physically held the teenager until local police swarmed the building. The aftermath was a scene of total devastation. Aaron Rollins was pronounced dead at the scene. Seth Bartell was rushed to an emergency trauma center, fighting for his life. He held on for 16 agonizing days before finally succumbing to his catastrophic head and chest wounds. In police custody, John exhibited a chilling disconnect from reality. During his initial interview with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, he lied, claiming his first shot missed Seth, before quickly changing his story to match the physical evidence. He explicitly told investigators he did not think a .22 caliber gun would do very much harm and claimed he just wanted to hurt the boy, despite aiming for the head. However, his own words sealed his legal fate. Just minutes after the shooting, John openly acknowledged to a state agent that he knew what he did was wrong. His fully videotaped confession detailed his extensive, step-by-step planning of the crime. The trial of John Jason McLaughlin utilized an unusual legal strategy called a bifurcated trial. The judge looked directly at the indisputable facts. He relied heavily on John's personal journals and his videotaped confession, which proved methodical, calculated planning days in advance. The judge legally declared him sane. The jury found John guilty of first-degree murder for the premeditated execution of Seth Bartell. The judge delivered a crushing penalty, explicitly rejecting the defense's request to have the teenager serve his time in a mental hospital. He sentenced John to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 33 years for the first-degree murder, and added a consecutive 12-year sentence for the second-degree murder of Aaron Rollins. He was also legally ordered to pay $15,000 in restitution to the Minnesota Crime Victims Reparations Board. In 2007, the Minnesota Supreme Court firmly upheld John's conviction. Today, John Jason McLaughlin is incarcerated at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Lino Lakes. He will be eligible for parole in 2038, when he is 50 years old. The events at Rocori High School stand as a permanent, chilling reminder of the devastating consequences of relentless bullying and the horrific reality of an alienated teenager turning his daily humiliation into cold-blooded murder. High school is a fragile ecosystem where perceived weakness can instantly turn a teenager into a target. For decades, the public narrative surrounding school shooters has relied heavily on the image of the bullied, helpless outcast who finally snaps. But the reality is often far more complex, contradictory, and deeply disturbing. On the morning of March 5th, 2001, a 15-year-old boy in Santa, California, brought a stolen revolver to Santana High School. He did not act of a sudden, blinding rage. He acted on a twisted, premeditated desire to orchestrate a massacre. The teenager behind the trigger was Charles Andrew Williams, known to everyone as Andy. Moving from a quiet town in Maryland to the bustling, sun-drenched suburbs of Southern California was a massive culture shock. He was physically slight and socially awkward, making him a target for harassment. Some students labeled him a freak and frequently stole his skateboard. His turn to extreme violence was not born purely out of isolation, but from a dark, festering desire for absolute notoriety. Andy explicitly vowed to his friends that he was going to pull a Columbine. He wanted the infamy. He originally formulated a highly tactical plan to climb onto the school's roof, intending to use the high vantage point to snipe students in the courtyard below. He eventually abandoned the roof strategy, settling instead on trapping his victims inside a bathroom. In the days leading up to the massacre, Andy explicitly told multiple friends that he was going to bring a gun to school and shoot people. The weekend prior to the attack, he escalated from verbal threats to physical proof. He literally pulled out a loaded .22 caliber revolver and showed it to his friends to prove he was not bluffing. The response from his peers was a catastrophic failure of judgment. They completely dismissed the weapon and the threats as a pathetic joke. They severely underestimated the lethal capacity of the teenager standing right in front of them. On Monday morning, March 5th, 2001, Andy bypassed his text box. He stole an 8-shot revolver, packed his pockets with extra ammunition, and concealed the lethal weapon inside a bright yellow backpack. He walked onto the campus of Santana High School, fully prepared to execute his horrific plan. Just before 9:20 a.m., Andy walked into a crowded boys' restroom. He used the enclosed space as a strategic trap to control the environment and corner his peers. He unzipped his yellow backpack, leveled the .22 caliber revolver, and opened fire. His first victim was 14-year-old freshman Brian Zucker. Andy shot him directly in the head. Brian collapsed to the restroom floor and died instantly. Andy then turned the weapon on a second student, Trevor Edwards, severely wounding him in the neck. Leaving the bleeding boys behind, Andy stepped out of the restroom doors and into the bustling outdoor quad area. The central courtyard was packed with hundreds of students transitioning between classes, completely unaware of the slaughter that had just begun. Andy raised his revolver and began firing systematically into the dense crowd. He shot 17-year-old Randy Gordon directly in the back, inflicting a catastrophic fatal wound. As Randy fell, the quad erupted into sheer pandemonium. School security guard Peter Ruiz heard the shots and bravely rushed forward to intervene. Andy locked his sights on the unarmed guard and shot him 3 separate times. As Ruiz lay bleeding on the concrete, the two made direct eye contact. Andy looked down at the wounded man and gave him a cold, deliberate smirk. He was thoroughly enjoying the absolute power he held over the school. Andy fired a total of 30 rounds, pausing methodically to reload the revolver multiple times. Brian Zucker and Randy Gordon were killed, while 11 other students and 2 school staff members were left bleeding on the concrete. The massacre was halted by the swift intervention of responding law enforcement and an off-duty police officer. Realizing armed adults were closing in, Andy retreated back into the boys' restroom. Officers stormed the bathroom and cornered him, with the gun's chamber open and his hands actively trying to reload for another volley of gunfire. Andy realized his moment of supreme power was over. He calmly surrendered, looking at the officers and stating plainly, "It's just me, I'm the only one." During his police interrogations and psychiatric evaluations, Andy offered a highly contradictory, chaotic web of motives. Displaying a shocking detachment from reality, he told psychiatrists he had no intention of hurting anyone. He claimed he didn't think 13 people were going to get shot, stating he just thought he was going to make a lot of noise and wait for the police to show up. Because Andy was only 15 years old at the time of the shooting, the legal proceedings were a fierce battle over accountability. The prosecution adamantly refused to let a mass murderer hide behind his age, highlighting his explicit premeditation, his Columbine obsession, and the cold smirk he flashed at his victims. The judge agreed, legally certifying Charles Andrew Williams to stand trial as an adult. Facing a mountain of indisputable evidence, Andy pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and 13 counts of attempted murder. During his 2002 sentencing, the judge delivered a crushing penalty. He condemned the teenager to 50 years to life in a California state penitentiary. Andy was also ordered to pay a $10,000 fine directly to the victim's restitution fund and was given credit for the 529 days he had already spent in juvenile hall. For over 2 decades, the families of Brian Zucker and Randy Gordon believed their son's killer was permanently locked away. In September 2024, Andy faced his first parole board hearing, following an agonizing 8-hour session where 22 different victims and family members testified. The parole board definitively denied his release. In January 2026, Andy Williams utilized a newly enacted youthful offender law to petition for his freedom. Despite the district attorney explicitly arguing that the victims won't be released from the grave and returned to their families, a San Diego Superior Court judge granted the request. The judge formally recalled the 50 years to life sentence and transferred the case back to juvenile court to redesignate his adult convictions as juvenile true findings. This monumental legal ruling effectively dismantles his permanent sentence. Prosecutors state this redesignation will result in his imminent release from prison without any parole supervision whatsoever. Today, Andy Williams is housed at the California Institution for Men in Chino, California, waiting to walk out the front gates. The Santana High School shooting stands as a chilling reminder of the fatal consequences of dismissing violent threats and a stark, controversial testament to a legal system willing to set a mass murderer free. When a bullied teenager brings a weapon to school, their goal is almost always to exert absolute power over the peers who made them feel entirely powerless. They want to corner their tormentors and deliver a devastating message of revenge. But on the morning of September 13th, 2017, a 15-year-old boy's plan for bloody ratellation took a heartbreaking, viral twist. He walked into his high school heavily armed, fully intending to hunt down his bullies. Instead, his primary weapon failed, and the only person he killed was the one heroic classmate brave enough to step forward and try to save everyone else. The architect of this tragic irony was Caleb Sharp. He was a 15-year-old sophomore at Freeman High School in Rockford, Washington. Caleb claimed he was the victim of severe bullying, feeling alienated and deeply humiliated by constant teasing. But instead of finding a healthy way to cope with the isolation, Caleb nurtured a terrifying obsession with mass violence. He intensely studied past school massacres. He admitted to watching a documentary called Mind of a Rampage Killer about 10 times, analyzing the methods of previous shooters. He and a friend created and uploaded highly disturbing YouTube videos where Caleb actively simulated shootouts and mock executions. His mental state was deteriorating rapidly, documented in a chilling journal found by police. In it, Caleb wrote about himself in the third person, stating, "I am the one who deserves to live, but I still need Caleb until I kill all those kids. Then Caleb will finally die, while I live on, even if it is in prison. The final decision to commit mass murder came down to a simple, terrifying game of chance. Just one day prior to the shooting, Caleb flipped a coin. Heads meant he would execute the massacre, tails meant he would drop it and never think about it again. The coin landed on heads. Unlike the shooters he studied, Caleb had zero intention of dying. He explicitly criticized the Columbine and Sandy Hook shooters, calling them stupid precisely because they killed themselves at the end. Caleb knew he was going to jail, and he fully planned to survive the ordeal. On the morning of September 13, 2017, Caleb bypassed his school supplies. He dressed in a t-shirt featuring the Punisher's skull logo, a violent comic book character obsessed with vengeance. He accessed his father's gun safe and armed himself for war. He packed the weapons into a black golf bag to easily transport them onto the school bus. During the bus ride, Caleb handed out letters to his friends. These were not suicide notes. They were deliberate warnings to his closest peers that he was about to do something horrific, explicitly stating he was going away. Caleb arrived at Freeman High School and displayed cold, tactical preparation. Before stepping inside the building, he put foam earplugs into his ears, preparing himself for the deafening sound of gunfire. He carried the heavy golf bag up the stairs and made his way to a crowded second-floor hallway directly outside a biology classroom. The corridor was packed with dozens of students gathering before the first bell. He did not open fire blindly. Caleb paused and waited for a couple of seconds to specifically make sure his three friends were not standing in the corridor. Once the area was clear of the people he liked, he unzipped the golf bag and pulled out the AR-15 rifle. He intended to unleash a massive barrage of gunfire. He raised the assault rifle and attempted to chamber a round, but the weapon failed. The AR-15 jammed immediately. As Caleb frantically struggled with the jammed rifle, trying to clear the malfunction, the surrounding students realized exactly what was happening. Panic swept through the corridor. Teenagers screamed and scattered, scrambling for the safety of the classrooms. But 15-year-old sophomore Sam Strahan did not run. Sam was a deeply resilient kid who had already endured massive personal tragedy, having lost his father in a terrible accident just months prior. He saw the alienated teenager struggling to load the assault rifle. Sam understood the catastrophic danger, but instead of turning his back and fleeing with the crowd, he made the ultimate sacrifice. Sam Strahan stepped directly into the line of fire. He walked right up to the armed teenager, attempting to physically block his path and verbally de-escalate the situation. Looking directly at the shooter, Sam spoke his final words. "I always knew you were going to shoot up the school. You know that is going to get you in trouble." Faced with this unimaginable bravery, Caleb's reaction was entirely cowardly. Realizing the assault rifle was useless and that Sam was actively ruining his plan, Caleb dropped the AR-15 onto the linoleum floor. He reached into his jacket, pulled a loaded .32 caliber Colt handgun, and shot the unarmed hero point blank. He shot Sam once in the stomach. As the brave 15-year-old collapsed forward, Caleb coldly shot him a second time, directly in the face. Sam Strahan died on the hallway floor, his heroic intervention costing him his life. With Sam out of the way, Caleb turned the handgun down a crowded hallway and fired blindly into the fleeing students. He struck 3 young girls, Gracie Jensen, Emma Nees, and Jordan Goldsmith, leaving them critically wounded and bleeding out on the school floor. The massacre was abruptly halted by the swift, fearless action of the school custodian, Joe Bowen. Hearing the gunfire, Bowen sprinted toward the second-floor hallway. He confronted the armed teenager and aggressively ordered him to drop the weapon and get on the ground. Stripped of his element of surprise and faced with an authoritative adult, Caleb's violent facade crumbled instantly. He dropped the handgun, raised his hands in the air, and completely surrendered without putting up a physical fight. During his intense police interrogations, Caleb exhibited a chilling detachment from the devastation he caused. He told detectives the massacre went exactly as intended. When pressed about the murder of his classmate, Caleb explicitly stated he didn't really care if Sam Strahan was dead. Because of the extreme premeditation and the devastating loss of life, Caleb Sharp was legally certified to stand trial as an adult. Facing a mountain of indisputable evidence, clear surveillance footage, and his own comprehensive confessions, Caleb eventually pleaded guilty to 1 count of premeditated first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and second-degree assault. In August 2022, the courtroom was filled with the survivors and the shattered families. Sam Strahan's mother, Amy, delivered a completely devastating statement. She looked directly at Caleb and entirely rejected his excuses of being a bullied outcast, exposing his actions as nothing more than calculated, evil cowardice. Judge Michael Price completely rejected the defense's request for a 20-year sentence. He stated that Caleb's extreme premeditation outweighed the typical leniency afforded to juveniles, condemning Caleb to an exceptional 40 years to life in a Washington state penitentiary. But the legal system soon delivered a massive shock to the victims. In April 2024, the Washington Court of Appeals reversed the 40-year sentence. In September 2024, Caleb Sharp was officially resentenced to 25 years to life, making him eligible for parole much sooner than the community was originally promised. The Freeman High School shooting remains a devastating scar on the community of Rockford. It stands as a chilling testament to the deadly consequences of ignoring escalating warning signs, and a permanent, heartbreaking monument to Sam Strahan, the 15-year-old boy who stared down a school shooter and traded his own life to save his classmates.
Saying pull the trigger that killed your son now masturbates to memory. All of you.
High school cafeterias are the bustling social hubs of a campus, packed with teenagers laughing, eating, and waiting for the morning bell. On the morning of February 27, 2012, the cafeteria at Chardon High School in Ohio was completely full. Hundreds of students were hanging out before their first class. Sitting quietly among them was a 17-year-old boy waiting for a transfer bus to an alternative school. He was not there to learn. He was a silent, deeply disturbed teenager who brought a stolen handgun into the building. But the true horror of this case is not just the bloody massacre he unleashed. It is the absolute, pure, unapologetic evil he displayed in the courtroom months later, ensuring his face would forever be associated with the worst of human nature. The architect of this nightmare was Thomas T.J. Lane. He was a 17-year-old student who attended Lake Academy, a school for at-risk youth, but he utilized the Chardon High School cafeteria as a morning transfer station. T.J. grew up in a highly chaotic and violent environment. Both of his parents had extensive criminal records and had served time in prison for violent domestic offenses. Because of the constant instability, TJ lived with his grandparents off and on, frequently spending weekends at their home. He was a quiet, withdrawn teenager, but his violent tendencies were already a matter of public record. In 2009, he pleaded guilty in juvenile court to disorderly conduct after punching another boy in the face. He was also arrested for physically restraining his uncle while his cousin hit him. Beneath his quiet exterior, TJ harbored a massive, simmering darkness fueled by a personal rivalry. Student witnesses confirmed that TJ had an ongoing feud with a 17-year-old Chardon student named Russell King Jr. King had explicitly threatened to beat TJ up. In response, TJ took up weightlifting the year prior, physically preparing himself for a confrontation. But TJ did not plan on winning a fistfight. He planned on executing his rival. He did not keep his dark thoughts completely hidden. 2 months before the shooting, TJ posted a chilling poem on his Facebook page. The passage detailed a scenario of absolute slaughter and ended with the explicit, terrifying line, "Die, all of you." When someone commented on the alarming post a month before the shooting, TJ chillingly brushed it off, replying that he wrote the text simply as a class assignment. His peers dismissed the warning, completely missing the reality that TJ was actively preparing to turn his dark fantasies into a bloody reality. The day before the massacre, TJ stole an empty semi-automatic pistol from his uncle. The night before the shooting, he sat in his room and methodically loaded 2 magazines with ammunition, inserting one directly into the handgun. He packed the weapon and a large knife into his bag. On the morning of February 27, 2012, TJ put on a t-shirt with the word "killer" written across the chest, covered it with a jacket, and headed to school. At 7:30 a.m., he sat alone at a table in the center of the crowded Chardon High School cafeteria. He placed earbuds into his ears, blocking out the noise of the hundreds of students surrounding him. He reached into his bag and pulled out the .22 caliber pistol. He did not fire randomly. He locked his focus entirely on a specific table of boys sitting nearby. TJ stood up, raised the pistol, and opened fire. He aimed specifically at 17-year-old Russell King Jr. first, striking his rival fatally. TJ then turned the weapon on the other teenagers at the table. He shot 16-year-old Daniel Parmator directly in the head. He shot 16-year-old Demetrius Hewlin in the head, dropping him to the cafeteria floor. TJ explicitly confessed to investigators that he aimed specifically for the heads of his victims so they would die quicker and not suffer. He continued his ruthless execution, shooting 17-year-old Nick Wolchak multiple times in the neck, arm, and back, and shot 18-year-old Joy Rickers as she attempted to flee. The deafening sound of gunfire sent the cafeteria into absolute pandemonium. Hundreds of screaming teenagers scrambled over tables and trampled each other in a desperate sprint for the exit doors. The massacre was abruptly halted by the incredible bravery of assistant football coach Frank Hall. Hearing the gunshots, Coach Hall did not run for cover. He charged directly toward the active shooter. Seeing the massive adult sprinting at him, TJ panicked, turned around, and fled down the hallway. Coach Hall chased the armed teenager entirely out of the building, preventing TJ from entering any classrooms and saving countless lives. TJ ran out of the school and fled into a nearby wooded area. Police officers swarmed the campus and launched a massive manhunt. A short time later, officers found TJ sitting quietly near a tree in the woods. He offered absolutely no resistance and surrendered. The devastation inside the school was catastrophic. Daniel Palmito, Russell King Jr., and Demetrius Hewlin all died from their horrific injuries. Nick Wolchak survived, but was left permanently paralyzed from the chest down. During his police interrogations and psychological evaluations, TJ proved to be a highly manipulative, cold-blooded monster. He actively tried to game the legal system. He intentionally lied to the court-appointed psychiatrist, claiming he experienced auditory hallucinations, delusions, and severe sexual abuse. He later explicitly confessed that he made all of it up because he was trying to appear schizophrenic and figured making up a history of abuse couldn't hurt his defense. He even forced himself to cry in his cell to convince the jail staff he was deeply depressed. Because of the severe, premeditated nature of the triple homicide, TJ Lane was legally certified to stand trial as an adult. Facing an overwhelming mountain of physical evidence, numerous eyewitnesses, and his own confession, he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of attempted aggravated murder, and weapons charges. But it was his sentencing hearing on February 26, 2013 that truly shocked the world and made this case a viral, unforgettable display of pure evil. TJ walked into the heavily guarded courtroom wearing a standard blue button-down dress shirt. Just before the judge entered the room, the 18-year-old unbuttoned the blue shirt to reveal a white t-shirt underneath. Scrolled across the front in thick black marker was the word killer, an exact replica of the shirt he wore on the day he executed the students. His defense attorney explicitly urged him not to make a statement, but TJ voluntarily waived his right to present mitigating information just so he could inflict maximum pain on the survivors. As the devastated mothers and fathers of the boys he murdered stood up to deliver their heart-wrenching victim impact statements, TJ actively mocked them. He smiled broadly, smirked, and openly laughed while the parents wept over their dead children. When the judge gave TJ the opportunity to speak, the teenager delivered the most vile, deeply disturbing statement ever recorded in an American courtroom. He turned his chair around to directly face the families of his victims. He raised his middle finger, flipping off the grieving parents, and stated, "This hand that pulled the trigger that killed your sons now masturbates to a memory. F*** all of you." The courtroom erupted in gasps of absolute horror and disgust. The judge immediately shut down the teenager's display of evil. The sentencing judge delivered a massive, uncompromising penalty, condemning TJ Lane to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 37 years. However, the terror inflicted by TJ Lane was not entirely over. On the night of September 11, 2014, the community of Chardon was thrown back into a state of sheer panic. TJ and 2 other highly dangerous inmates, convicted kidnapper Clifford Opperud and convicted child murderer Lindsay Bruce, managed to escape from the Allen Correctional Institution in Lima, Ohio. They scaled a perimeter fence during recreation time and vanished into the darkness. Schools were immediately locked down, and police launched a massive, frantic manhunt. The freedom was incredibly short-lived. A patrol helicopter, utilizing an infrared camera and a K9 unit, tracked his location in the dark. Heavily armed police officers located TJ hiding near a local church, holding a pitchfork. He was captured without incident. Following his escape, the Department of Corrections transferred TJ Lane to a Supermax facility before ultimately moving him in March 2016 to the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in Lucasville. Today, he remains locked away in Lucasville, entirely isolated from the outside world. He will die in prison, forever remembered not as a powerful mastermind, but as the pathetic, smirking monster who destroyed 3 families and laughed in their faces. Senior year of high school is supposed to be the ultimate victory lap, a final stretch before stepping out into the adult world. For 18-year-old Jacob Davis, the future was entirely secured. He was a brilliant honor student at Lincoln County High School in Fayetteville, Tennessee, ranking in the top 25 of his graduating class. He earned excellent grades, stayed completely out of trouble, and had recently secured a highly coveted academic scholarship to study computer science at Mississippi State University. On paper, Jacob was the absolute definition of teenage success. But beneath this perfect academic facade, he was enduring a devastating psychological spiral fueled entirely by consuming sexual jealousy. The target of his dark obsession was another 18-year-old senior named Robert Cresson, known to his classmates as Nick. Nick was a popular high school football player. The deadly conflict between the two boys was not the result of public bullying or hallway altercations. It was deeply private, sparked by a single devastating revelation. Jacob's current girlfriend, Tonya Bishop, privately confided in him that she had previously engaged in a sexual encounter with Nick. This single piece of information shattered Jacob's reality. Instead of processing the past or walking away, he let the revelation consume him completely. For 3 agonizing months, Jacob suffered a severe internal breakdown. The jealousy ate away at his mind. He began sleeping only a few hours at night, plagued by intrusive thoughts of his girlfriend and his rival. His pristine academic record collapsed, with his grades plummeting from A's to D's. The prestige of his college scholarship and the pride of his family meant absolutely nothing compared to the overwhelming hatred festering inside him. Jacob decided he was going to take Nick's life, and he wanted to do it in front of the entire school. On May 19, 1998, just 3 days before they were scheduled to walk across the stage and receive their diplomas, Jacob put his deadly plan into motion. He bypassed his classes and dressed entirely in black, projecting a dark, calculated image. He armed himself with a powerful Magnum bolt-action rifle and drove to the campus of Lincoln County High School. Jacob did not enter the building to hunt blindly. He knew the school's schedule with absolute certainty. He backed his car into a parking space, directly facing the main exits, utilizing his vehicle as a sniper blind. He sat inside the car, gripped the Magnum rifle, and waited for the 7th period bell to ring. At exactly 2 p.m., the heavy double doors of the high school swung open. Because classes were changing, the parking lot and the surrounding areas were immediately packed with between 100 and 150 students. Among the dense crowd of teenagers was Nick Cresson, walking out to meet his friend Cassandra Sharp so they could go to their 7th period class together. Jacob spotted his target. He opened his car door, stepped out into the bright Tennessee afternoon, and raised the heavy rifle to his chest. From a specifically measured distance of roughly 30 to 40 feet away, Jacob aimed directly at the football player and pulled the trigger. The first shot tore through the air and struck Nick. The 18-year-old collapsed to his knees on the hard asphalt. Teenagers screamed and dove behind parked cars, completely terrified. Nick realized exactly what was happening. Bleeding and trapped on the ground, he desperately hoisted his heavy school textbooks in front of his face, attempting to use them as a makeshift shield against the high-powered rifle rounds. As Cassandra Sharp would later testify in court, Nick looked up at Jacob and actively pleaded for his life, explicitly begging the honor student to stop shooting. Jacob ignored the desperate pleas. He maintained a cold, terrifying focus. He slowly walked closer to the wounded boy, eliminating the distance between them. He raised the rifle and fired a second shot, knocking Nick backward. Jacob continued his methodical approach. He stood directly over his helpless rival, aimed the barrel of the Magnum rifle down at Nick, and fired a third and final shot, ensuring the execution was absolute. With the murder complete, Jacob engaged in a display of chilling, remorseless detachment. He calmly placed the smoking rifle down onto the asphalt and sat directly on the ground near the bleeding body. As students and teachers frantically called for emergency services, a friend of Jacob's walked over to the horrifying scene. Looking at the brilliant honor student sitting next to his victim, the friend stated plainly, "Man, you just flushed your life down the toilet." Jacob looked back at his friend and delivered a chilling reply. He stated, "Yes, but it's been fun." Nick Cresson was rushed to the hospital, but the massive internal damage inflicted by the Magnum rifle was too severe. He was pronounced dead 15 minutes after arriving. The tight-knit community of Fayetteville was entirely shattered, forced to process the reality that an honor student had turned a crowded parking lot into an execution site just 3 days before graduation. When police arrived at the school, Jacob surrendered without a fight. The ensuing trial highlighted the undeniable, cold-blooded premeditation of the murder. Jacob deliberately dressed in black, chose a high-powered weapon, and strategically parked his car to ambush his target. He executed a classmate in front of over 100 peers simply because he could not handle adolescent jealousy. Jacob Davis was formally convicted of first-degree murder, reckless endangerment, and carrying a weapon on school property. The sentencing phase exposed the harsh reality of Tennessee state law. Jacob was sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole. However, state sentencing laws dictate that offenders serving this specific sentence must serve a minimum of 85% of 60 years before ever reaching eligibility. This legally mandated a 51-year minimum sentence, functionally equipping a teenager with a life without parole sentence. The reality of his decision quickly stripped away the twisted satisfaction he felt on that asphalt parking lot. He traded a full academic scholarship to Mississippi State University for a tiny concrete cell. His demeanor shifted drastically behind bars. In a 2001 prison interview, the smirking teenager was gone. He explicitly stated that he would suffer his own personal hell for the rest of his life, admitting there was nothing he could do to make the guilt go away. As of the latest appellate rulings, Jacob Davis remains incarcerated at the Turney Center Industrial Complex in Hickman County, Tennessee. He will not be legally eligible for a parole board hearing until the year 2049, when he is 70 years old. The Lincoln County High School shooting stands as a permanent, chilling warning. It is a terrifying examination of how consuming jealousy and dark obsession can warp a promising future into a calculated, cold-blooded execution, leaving one teenager in the grave and another locked in a cage for the rest of his natural life. From the student who targeted his school principal to the teenager who turned a quiet movie night into a fiery nightmare, the stories of these 10 young men represent the absolute darkest extremes of adolescent revenge. They are the bullied who became the butchers, crossing the line from victims into cold-blooded killers, and their actions leave a permanent scar on the communities they shattered. They are, without question, among the most evil teens in prison today. If you found this exploration into these shocking cases compelling, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share your thoughts on these stories in the comments below. Which case did you find the most disturbing?